Hollywood, 1939 to 1981. The cameras loved them. The studios controlled them. The system wanted them quiet. But when it came to racism, they refused to play along. These 10 legends put their careers on the line, not for publicity, not for praise, because silence wasn't an option.
Clark Gable. Clark Gable wasn't just the king of Hollywood. He was a man who, in his quiet way, chose principle over comfort. In 1939, Gable arrived on the set of Gone with the Wind, the biggest film of its time. But what he saw behind the scenes infuriated him. The production had segregated restrooms and trailers for the black cast and crew. When Gable learned that Hattie McDaniel and other black actors had been relegated to second-class treatment, he threatened to quit the film unless the facilities were integrated. His star power forced the studio to back down. But the fight didn't end there. At the 1940 Academy Awards, Hattie McDaniel made history as the first black person to win an Oscar. But she wasn't allowed to sit with the white actors, not even at her own table. Gable was reportedly furious. He wanted to boycott the ceremony, but was persuaded by McDaniel to attend anyway. The moment may have been silent, but his actions spoke volumes. Clark Gable never saw himself as an activist. But when given the choice between stardom and standing up, he chose to stand. Marilyn Monroe. She was the ultimate sex symbol, but behind Marilyn Monroe's beauty was a sharp mind and a fearless sense of justice. In the 1950s, the iconic jazz singer Ella Fitzgerald was shut out of major venues like the Macambo Club in Hollywood, not because of her talent, but because she was black. Marilyn didn't just sit by. She made a call. She told the club, "Book Ella for a week, and I'll sit at the front table every single night." They knew Monroe's presence would draw headlines, and they said yes. True to her word, she showed up every night, and the house was packed. Ella later said Marilyn was an unusual woman, ahead of her time, and she said, "I want to do this because I believe in it." And she did. But Monroe's fight for equality wasn't a one-time gesture. She also fought to hire black talent, including her vocal coach, Phil Moore, who helped shape her career. She even took on studios that tried to keep her in a box, one that excluded people who looked like Ella. In an era when white Hollywood stars looked the other way, Monroe used her fame to open doors that had been sealed shut for generations. Marilyn Monroe didn't just make history. She made space for others to make theirs. Rita Moreno. Rita Moreno was the first Latina to win an Oscar, but instead of being celebrated, she was typecast, tokenized, and pushed to the margins. After her breakout role as Anita in West Side Story in 1961, Moreno should have been flooded with leading roles. Instead, she was offered the same tired caricatures, maids, spitfires, gypsies, with exaggerated accents and no dignity. So she made a decision. She stopped acting. For 7 years. She later said, "I decided if that's all Hollywood sees me as, then they don't get to see me at all." But her protest wasn't just personal. It was political. Moreno aligned herself with the civil rights movement, marched with black and Latino leaders, and gave public speeches calling out the industry's racism. She joined causes that brought black and brown communities together. She stood beside the NAACP, called for better education in Puerto Rican neighborhoods, and demanded Latino representation behind the camera, not just in front of it. And when she returned to Hollywood, she came back on her terms, with roles that reflected her dignity, not diminished it. Rita Moreno didn't just break barriers, she burned down the whole wall. Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando didn't just play rebels, he was one. In 1964, he marched alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He raised bail money for civil rights protesters. He even supported the Poor People's Campaign financially and publicly. But his boldest and most controversial act came at the 1973 Academy Awards. Brando won Best Actor for The Godfather, But instead of accepting the Oscar, he sent Native American activist Sacheen Littlefeather to the stage. She delivered a short, firm message. Brando was rejecting the award in protest of Hollywood's racist portrayal of Native Americans, and in response to the federal siege at Wounded Knee. The backlash was instant. She was booed, jeered, and mocked by the audience. Backstage, John Wayne had to be physically restrained by 6 security guards. He reportedly tried to storm the stage and confront her. And when Clint Eastwood took the stage later, he joked about giving awards to all the cowboys shot in John Ford westerns, mocking Littlefeather's message and cause. Brando paid the price. He was blacklisted from major projects, ridiculed in the press, and mocked by his peers. But he never apologized. He once said, "We've seen the American Indian portrayed as savage, hostile, and evil. It's time we say no more." Brando didn't just speak truth to power, he did it in the lion's den. Shirley MacLaine. In a time when most white actresses stayed silent, Shirley MacLaine used her voice like a megaphone, outspoken, unapologetic, unafraid to ruffle feathers. During the height of the civil rights movement, MacLaine marched with protesters, attended rallies, and gave interviews where she directly called out systemic racism in America and in Hollywood. She supported controversial figures like Angela Davis and backed legislation and candidates who pushed for civil rights, even when it meant alienating industry peers. But Shirley wasn't just talking. She was showing up. She joined sit-ins, raised funds for black voter drives, and used her celebrity to elevate black voices on platforms where they were never heard. At one political event, MacLaine stunned donors by refusing to perform unless the black staff at the venue were allowed to stay in the room. She said, "I'm not going to sing in front of racists." The media labeled her difficult, radical, even unhinged. But she wore those labels like armor. Shirley MacLaine didn't just speak truth to power. She kicked down the studio doors and dragged the truth in with her. Paul Newman. Paul Newman was known for his piercing blue eyes, but his real power, his unwavering moral vision. In 1965, he flew to Alabama to march alongside Dr. King in Selma. He wasn't promoting a movie. He wasn't doing press. He was marching for justice, with no cameras, no entourage, and no need for applause. But it didn't stop there. He backed black-led civil rights organizations, donated to black colleges and legal defense funds, and gave money to bail out protesters arrested during nonviolent demonstrations. Newman also called out racism in the film industry, pushing for more diverse casts and stories that reflected the real struggles of marginalized people. And when he made his fortune from his Newman's Own food brand, he didn't hoard it, he gave it away. Over $500 million to education, civil rights, and anti-poverty causes. He once said, "I'm not a liberal. I'm a humanist. I care about human beings." Paul Newman didn't shout. He didn't march for headlines. He did the work, and let it speak louder than fame ever could. Jean Seberg. Jean Seberg's name isn't often mentioned in Hollywood history, but that's not an accident. By the late 1960s, she was one of the most celebrated actresses in French cinema, a rising star with international acclaim. But behind the camera, she was sending money, food, and support to the Black Panther Party. Jean didn't just donate. She built relationships. She offered rides to court dates, gave press interviews defending their cause, and used her platform to fight systemic racism. And the FBI took notice. Under COINTELPRO, J. Edgar Hoover's covert operation to crush black activism, Seberg became a target. They illegally wiretapped her, stalked her, and leaked a false story to the press claiming she was pregnant with a Black Panthers baby, to humiliate and discredit her. The story, published by major outlets, devastated Jean. She went into early labor from the stress. Her child died 2 days later. She never recovered. In 1979, her body was found in Paris. The cause: probable suicide. But her legacy? One of quiet bravery. Jean Seberg wasn't radical. She was righteous, and Hollywood let her be erased for it. Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor was more than a screen goddess. She was a friend and a fighter. She stood with black artists during segregation, inviting Sammy Davis Jr. and Michael Jackson into spaces where they were typically banned. She donated to civil rights organizations, stood by marginalized entertainers, and refused to work with studios that supported segregation. Later, she'd lead the charge on HIV, awareness during a time of fear and silence. But her roots in fighting injustice ran deep, decades before. Elizabeth Taylor didn't just believe in equality. She made room at the table and pulled up extra chairs. Jane Fonda. Jane Fonda was born into privilege and chose to fight against it. In the 1970s, she became a lightning rod for controversy, not because of scandal, but because of solidarity. She aligned herself with the Black Panthers, raised money for Angela Davis's legal defense, and spoke at universities where her message was unwelcome, that Black lives mattered, that the system was racist, and the silence was complicity. Fonda was surveilled by the FBI. She was arrested more than once. But she kept showing up. She later said, "Being a good ally means listening, learning, and never walking away, even when it's hard." Jane Fonda didn't dip her toe into justice. She dove in head first. Robert Redford. Robert Redford wasn't flashy. He didn't march with a megaphone or shout from podiums. Instead, he built a platform. In 1981, he founded the Sundance Institute to amplify voices that Hollywood ignored: Black, brown, indigenous, and marginalized filmmakers who had stories to tell but no stage to stand on. He funded them, promoted them, gave them the spotlight he could have kept for himself. Redford also insisted on socially conscious storytelling in his own work. Films about corruption, injustice, and systemic racism. He once said, "The truth has power, and film is how we share it." Robert Redford didn't fight racism with speeches. He fought it by letting others speak.